Hey friends, my name is Zara and this is the Daydreaming Wolves podcast, in which I talk about folk herbalism, the tarot, trauma-informed magic, as well as the politics of healing and small business adventures. Sometimes it's just me sharing rituals and inspiration, and sometimes I have beautiful like-minded guests on the show. If you would like to learn more about my work, you can visit daydreamingwolves.com for all things magic and sarahmagdalenalove.com for web design and tech support. Feel free to subscribe on iTunes, and if you like my podcast, know that a review would really be appreciated. Happy, shiny, beautiful full moon in Gemini to you. I'm so excited to share episode number 20 today, and I just have a couple of announcements, but mainly mushy things to say before we go on and listen to what the amazing Rachael has shared with us. So yeah, 20 episodes. This is really exciting. I started this podcast a bit more than a year ago, and I never thought it would grow this much, and I also never thought that I would have this many amazing guests on the show. So I started sending out these fangirl emails saying like, hey, I love your work, I saw you on Instagram, will you come talk to me? And so many amazing people have said yes, and I'm so grateful. And I hope for many, many more episodes and amazing guests as well. So thank you so much for everyone who's listened. Thank you for everyone who shared, who left a review, who's just given me feedback. I really appreciate that so much. It means the world to me. As I said, I'm really excited to share today's episode, and I know I always say that, but it's also really always true. Rachael Maddox has talked to me, and she's an amazing trauma resolution educator, coach, and guide, and we just got really deep into the juicy stuff. We talked about what it can mean to really start fresh with intimacy and do things differently. We talked about the similarities between consent and sex and consent in marketing. We talked about our visions for collective sexual healing and trauma resolution, and we talked about what we can do when old trauma resurfaces. So really, really so valuable and healing stuff to think and dream and talk about. I'm going to leave all the links in the show notes as well, but just wanted to say again that Rachael is running an amazing Kickstarter right now that's so worth supporting. She is writing her second book, Sex After Trauma, and is crowdfunding that because obviously writing a book is expensive, and she has amazing rewards for people who support the book. So check that out. You can do so at bit.ly/sexaftertrauma. So that is bit.ly/sexaftertrauma. And as I said, that is also in the show notes, and you can also find Rachael Maddox at Rachael Maddox on Instagram. And she will have the link in her profile as well. So yeah, check that out. A little announcement about my work as well. I've been thinking and scratching my head about what to offer around the new year, because I know lots of people really love kind of New Year's or year ahead readings. And I wasn't sure about offering them because I personally don't really love super big spreads with like more than 10 cards. It sometimes feels a bit overwhelming to me, and when I received those, I wasn't always sure if I was really always taking all of that in. So I wanted to create something that is more interactive, that you can take and make your own and customize, and ultimately that you can create your own little ritual out of. So I'm offering year ahead tarot readings and ritual kits that are personalized. You will receive an audio recorded 7-card spread, so quite in depth but not totally overwhelming, kind of just the right amount, I hope. Then there's going to be a journaling prompt for each of the cards to really go deeper with them and see what their wisdom is that you can make the most of. And then they will include a pretty simple folk herbalism recipe that you can make at home, and a suggestion for a plant ally to work with in the new year. And then finally, there's going to be a ritual suggestion that you can customize and do around the new year. And the intention with that really is that you can find your own authentic and beautiful goals that you want to set for yourself. and just to kind of be a little bit more intentional in how we're moving into the new year. So this is not about weight loss. It's not necessarily about finding a new job or dumping your boyfriend if these are not things that you want to do. If you are, you do you. But basically, it's just a way to really celebrate that transition and this particular season as well, and to make sure that you have something that will guide you through the holidays with really excellent boundaries and a lot of love for yourself and a lot of attention for your life. If you're interested in that work, these are $44 to $88 on a sliding scale. I totally trust that you will find the right price that fits your budget, and you can find more either on Instagram, on my Instagram profile, or at daydreamingwolves.com. Thank you for listening, and now finally on to today's show. Bye. I'm really excited to have Rachael Maddox on the show today. So Rachael is a trauma resolution educator, coach, and guide, and she has written the book called Secret Bad Girl, which I read, and gosh, I think I read it in a weekend, and it was so deeply touching and beautiful. She's writing her second book, which I'm really excited about, and she just generally is someone who shares such incredible, heartfelt, beautiful tools and insights on the internet. I'm on her newsletter and have been for a while, and I learned so much from her, and also I've been so inspired by how she has always, I don't know if that's always been the case, but about how she's sharing her story. I think it's really, really beautiful. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Rachael, and then she can introduce herself as well. That was my little fangirl intro.
Hi, Sarah. So awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So maybe let's start by asking you where you are in the world right now and where you are in nature and in your body. So what is going on around you?
Love that question. So I'm in La Jolla, California, which is just north of San Diego. And in terms of in nature, I'm like super freaking lucky. I found this magical little house just a block from the ocean where I can see the ocean from my bed. So I'm very connected to the tides and the rhythms of the sea and the moon and the stars. And I just feel really, really grateful to be immersed. And also, the fall is coming, so it's not as sun-drenched as it's been the last few months, which is kind of a relief for me as I nuzzle and work on my next book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then in terms of my body, I'm on my period, so I'm a little achy and crampy, but I'm in a place of more sustained capacity than ever before, and I think it's because I'm very attuned to the rhythms of my body, to my expansions and my contractions, and so got a lot of capacity these days for intensity, for intimacy, for rest, for all the yummy things.
Yay, that's amazing. Yeah, great. That's beautiful. I would love to know kind of what you're offering to the world and also how you came to do this world. So I know your story because I read your book, but to anyone who's really new to you, can you tell us a little bit more about where you're coming from in your approach and what you care about the most and what your vision is? I read your last newsletter and I loved what you said about what you're wishing for the world and for liberation and sexuality and all of these good things.
Yeah, totally. So my background, let's see, professionally, I started out as a coach in the coaching world. I went to the Coaches Training Institute, etc. Worked a lot of psychological models for a long time. And then my life kind of blew up in a lot of different ways. And after being in a pretty sexless 8-year marriage, we split up. And I ended up having 2 sexual violations happen when I was 25. Meanwhile, a few years before that, all of the sexual trauma from my early teenage years and all of my teenage years really started to surface, and I went into kind of a deep, embodied, exhausted depression. And it was something that coaching couldn't coach me out of, right? And eventually I had, looking back now, if I had gone to a doctor, they probably would have told me I had vaginismus, or whatever the term is, where chronic pain in my vagina. I had that for about 2 years, and then I ended up having vaginal atypia, which was one step away from vaginal melanoma in my on my clitoral hood.
Wow,
What a
yeah.
disaster. So I had surgery. I had about a marble size of my pleasure trove removed so that I wouldn't have melanoma spreading throughout my whole body. So I, again, spiraled deeper into what I like to call the trauma spell. And from my experience and from my studies, trauma is an embodied violation hangover. It's a hangover from a violation that's happened in our past that gets stuck and lodged in our bodies. And I think where the coaching industry falls short, or even a lot of therapeutic models fall short, is we don't actually approach our healing somatically. We don't actually approach, give our bodies a chance to resolve and complete those incomplete emergencies, that hangover that's in the system. So, you know, the Google machine provided, I found this incredible healer named Bridget Dixon's just by fate and by luck. And she was very close to where I was living at the time. And she also had a training program called Alchemical Alignment, which was trauma resolution, embodiment of the spirit kind of thing. And I went through that training. I had just a few sessions with her. My entire life was like drastically different. Like I could see different. Like my actual eyes, you know, everything changed in my body, in my system, in my soul. And I just started seeing this gap in the industry, this tremendous gap around how we're approaching our healing and what's actually needed for efficient and effective healing to take hold. So I became wildly devoted to this cause and this calling, and I laid down on the earth and I prayed to God, like, take the pain from my body, do whatever you must do, use me. I am here to be of service to the millions of women who have sexual trauma and either don't know it or don't know how to work with it and don't know how to heal. Put me to work. And that's what happened. And I wrote my first book, Secret Bad Girl, and now I'm working on my second book, Sex After Trauma. And that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. That's amazing. I really feel it comes through how much you care about this. It feels really authentic when you share what you're doing and what you care about. And I just feel, so lucky that I stumbled across your work. Yeah. Another question I have for you, and I want to kind of intro this question by where I'm coming from myself with this. So this year, particularly, I really started to think about and explore the relationship of gender and trauma in my life. And I began speaking about trauma. I began remembering things I had forgotten for a really long time. I wrote about this, and I really, it was a mountain of resistance around that. I found it really hard in the beginning, especially in my family, because I felt like I almost wanted to take responsibility to not make my family feel like they have felt me because they haven't looked after me the way they would have wanted to, like there's just so many layers around like shame and guilt and like, how am I going to be seen when I'm speaking about this? It's really complex. And at the same time, I know how powerful it can be to own our stories. And I felt really, after reading your book, just felt so encouraged and felt such a weight coming off my shoulders. And but still I find it hard sometimes, and it's definitely like a journey in itself. And so I would love to hear a little bit more on how you found the courage to speak about these things and kind of what roadblocks you encountered and how you handled those.
It's such a good question, and it's something we don't talk about very often, but I was living with my family when I wrote my book because I had gone home to deal with my cancer surgery, all that stuff. I had moved out once, but then I spiraled again. I just had to go back home. So I wrote this book in my parents' house, and pieces of my book, Secret Bad Girl, I talk about how my mom did nothing when I told her I had been raped. And, like my older brother, there were lots of dynamics that I kind of highlighted in my book. And, there's a part of me that has a little bit of regret around the way I worded some things. I think I would be a little bit more sensitive to my family's experience next time around. And in fact, when I published the print copy, I did update and shift some things. It's a little different than the ebook. But ultimately, I think there's a way that when we're working with really deep, hard stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and when we're sharing our stories, we have to tell the truth about what really happened,
Mm-hmm.
so that other people don't feel isolated in the truth of what happened with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think specifically around our families, what you spoke to is so true. There's shame, there's guilt, there's grief. And my mom didn't talk to me for almost 3 months after my book came out. You know, I requested to her, if she was going to read it, to read the whole thing and to also go to a therapist. Of course, she read the first chapter, put it down, didn't talk to me, and didn't go to a therapist. So I love her. Like,
Yeah.
we've come through, you know, to the other side of that whole thing. But it took a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think each person is different, and each person's family dynamics are different. I knew my family would be able to get through it. Some families, like, that might not be the case. Like, the emotional maturity level of your parents might not be one in which they can forgive you or they can forgive themselves. And ultimately, that's what it came down to with my mom. Like, she couldn't forgive herself for what happened. So I think it's a very personal journey. And I think there are also ways of sharing things. Like, if you've never shared before, there are ways of sharing things anonymously. There are ways of sharing things and making it so that your family can't see. Obviously, we can't control everything, but it's a sensitive line, and you have to ask yourself the cost benefit. And that's a very personal question.
Yeah, that's totally true. I also really love what you said about the seventh generation and this idea that we inherit trauma in some ways, but that we are so incredibly lucky in our generation in some ways, and that we have so many tools and we have this community around ourselves. You know, we can find each other in ways that, you know, previous generations just weren't really able to. So coming back to my question, I love this idea of being the alchemist and the seventh generation, and really drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm not going to pass this on. I'm really going to invest everything I have in my body and my mind and my heart to do these things differently. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up too, because part of what happens is, if what you're really devoted to is being that alchemist, the person who shifts the lineage both before and after, right? The 7 generations that came before you and the 7 generations that are coming after you, then the process doesn't stop at, I told my story and I shared a bit about my mom and she's pissed off at me. Like, that's the very beginning. That might even be like before the beginning. Right? The process of really being that alchemist that heals your lineage is one of finding a way to heal the relationships that feel like they've hurt you the most, or the places where you want to put the most blame, or the places where you know, like, so it's a longer process. And part of, there's so many pieces I could talk to here. You know, my grandmother read my book. My grandmother was totally a secret bad girl. Again, there was all of this awkward tension in our, I mean, my entire family, like, I couldn't, gosh, Thanksgiving and Christmas were like the worst days of my life. Like, oh Jesus, I just having to show up and like see everybody, and then like see me, and like people just basically pretending I wasn't there because it was so uncomfortable for everyone. But now, you know, first of all, I moved away, so okay, that's one piece. But second of all, now I think people are starting to feel proud of me, and also starting to feel like more free in their own healing, in their own. And even if it's not a very conscious thing, there's this openness, this space that opened for everyone.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. And I think it's so much about the generations and the times that they've been in as well. I feel like a lot of tension in my family has come from, or between me and my 2 of my grandmothers, who both have survived divorce by getting married and by being really pretty, you know, and not being outspoken, and kind of really tuning themselves down in some ways. And there's tension in the memories that I have of like having my skirt tucked down, or like, you know, being told I was too expressive, or, you know, I think we all have similar experiences. And I'm reading a book currently about intergenerational trauma and specifically the Second World War. And there was a story of a woman who had a mother who later told her, you know, you being pretty was a matter of life and death for us. Because you were so pretty, we were given more. And I really felt this moment of release. I was like, yeah, that was true for my grandmothers too. And it's so not true for me anymore. You know, I'm not in that place anymore that I need to be pretty to survive. And yeah, and bridging that is that's a long journey to walk, really, between these two different experiences, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to say something in that too. It's so interesting because I haven't really studied like World War II trauma very much, even though my family's from Poland originally, Poland and Scotland, but they came here before World War II, right after the pogroms. Anyway, but I've read a lot about post-traumatic slave syndrome and all of the effects of that. And it was the opposite. It was like you couldn't be too smart, because if you were smart, you know, or if you were pretty, they would, like, the slave owners might take you, and you had higher chances of being married into the family. So you'd be separated from your family if you were pretty or smart. Yeah. It's so interesting the way like these dynamics are different based on the cultural oppression happening.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I would love to talk a little bit about the many beautiful tools that you're sharing on Instagram and in your newsletter, and also in the, is it called the Grown Goddess video series? Is that the right title? Yeah. I've shared that with so many people. You would not imagine like how many times I've sat down with people and was like, okay, can we watch video number 4 again, please? I would almost go so far as to say, if I'm meeting someone new and I'm a bit excited about them and I want to be flirty and they're not open to watching the video series with me, it's like, sorry, that's not going to happen.
Right, it's your barometer.
Yeah, it's just very interesting to see how people respond to that, you know? I think that's just, I am a Scorpio. I do a lot of security background checks before I become intimate with someone. There's a lot of studying them going on, and that is just one of my security measures. Yeah. So sorry, I want to say also what this video series is about before I talk about it any further, so people are on board with what we're laughing about. So it's a 7-part, is it 7 parts? 8. It's actually 8 parts, yeah. So it's a really beautiful video series that you can sign up at rachelmaddox.com. And it goes, through so many really important subjects, such as, do I even have trauma? And then there's a really beautiful game called Boundaries and Belonging that I really recommend anyone checks out. It's so cool. And it's just basically this really great toolbox, and it has really given me a lot of ground to work with and things to reflect on. And it has influenced the relationships I have with other people. So that's really, really great. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what your favorite tools are? And yeah, that would be great.
Oh, I love hearing that. That's just so great. It's just this thing that I made in 2 days, like in my living room for free, just to like give out to the world. So I'm so glad that that's useful for you. Well, I think one of the things that I really am excited and jazzed about right now in terms of tools is around sensuality and sex. So when we have histories of trauma violation, it can be really, really scary to re-engage with pleasure on any level, on a personal level and definitely on an interpersonal level. And so there's 2 different videos in that series. One is around sensuality, when it scares you silly, and one is around emotionally safe sex after trauma.
Yeah.
So the first piece around sensuality, it's really about like, what are the entryways into sensuality that don't have to necessarily be erotic? What are the ways that you can access what feels good sensation-wise to your system when maybe your system's shut down? Because what happens around when we have histories of trauma is our capacity to feel pleasure can go numb, both on the physical level, like the actual tangible physical level. We can become numb in our genitals. We can become numb just like in our skin, we can become numb. And then also on the emotional level, like our capacity to feel joy and turn on an excitement can also diminish. And so what are your entryways into sensuality in terms of the 5 senses? Like, what are the things that are easiest for you to access joy through? Is it music? Is it like scent? Is it lighting your feeding your eyes with things that are beautiful. So there's a lot of cool steps and different levels of how you can re-engage with sensuality. Love that one. And then the emotionally safe sex after trauma video. Obviously, I'm writing a whole book about this right now, sex after trauma. So that piece, I believe, I talk a lot about consent. I talk a lot about how to have conversations with people who you might be wanting to have a sexual relationship with, or even people who you're already in a sexual relationship with. How can you make it safer? We don't have these really practical tools around conversations and around just making intimacy safe and available for people. Yeah. So I'm really jazzed about that video too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I really love having these super practical too, because I understand on a, I guess on a mind level, I can understand that I could sit down with anyone and be like, hey, so what do we really want to do here? How can we make this safe? What's your expectation? But still, I find it so valuable to really bring practical tools and frameworks in, because I feel in many ways, and, that might not be your experience or anyone's listening, but I feel like as someone who has experienced sexual trauma quite young, I have become such a master at dissociation, and I can do the wildest shit on autopilot, I feel I feel like I have a lot of muscle memory in my body and that gives me confidence in the quantity. I feel like I've done that a lot of times. I know how this works, and obviously everyone is different. But I think the way we look at sex often, quantity and experience is the one thing that most people get confidence from, which is such a shame, really, because that's not saying very much about how you can show up in the moment with someone, how you can be open and available and just fluid with what comes up. So anyway, so with that in mind, I feel like on one level I have this experience and the confidence and the knowing that my body can do a lot of stuff on autopilot, On the other hand, I'm in this place in my life now when I'm like, oh, I've really come out on the other side of so much trauma processing and resolution, and I really want to do things differently. I want to meet people on a different level, and in a way, I'm starting fresh, and I'm like the Fool in the tarot, and and that's really beautiful. And I'm meeting other people who are exactly in the same place, and I feel like there's so much tender beauty and saying like, hey, do you want to watch Rachel's video series together? And we can just be honest and be like, look, we might come to this table with a certain amount of experience, but really in a way we're also starting from scratch, and we can start with new tools, and that's really great. Yeah.
What I love about that is, we might be coming with a lot of experience, but what kind of experience is it? And so the new experiences we're calling in are tenderness. Yeah. They're bell hooks definition of love, right? Love is a verb: care, affection, commitment, attention, kindness, all those things. Speaking of which, so I have a video that's on the queue that I haven't finished yet.
Oh, God.
I made it, but I didn't, I looked like crap that day. It's just I need to redo it. But it's how to stop dissociating in sex.
Okay.
And there are two things. Do you want me to share?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Yes, please.
Okay, so the first bit, so the piece around dissociation, okay, one, what's happening when we're going into this autopilot is we're disconnected from our capacity to stay in our bodies and make choices that keep us connected to what we really want and what we really need and what we're really comfortable and safe with. So the first piece is around sort of cultivating a new relationship with the connection between your body and your words. So I'm going to explain that piece in a second. And then the second piece is around really noticing when and where does this dissociative habit begin for you in the process of being related to somebody. Yeah. So for the first piece, there's a game. It's called Red Light, Green Light, Reverse.
Oh.
Else in person. And what you do is you stand across the room from one another, and one person's a driver and one person's the car, quote unquote. And the point of this game is for the driver to be completely in touch with what they're experiencing in their body and to direct the car based on their own feeling of ease, relaxation, exhale, desire, accessibility, and connected, like I'm still here in my body. So the person standing across from them, and they would say green light, which would mean one step forward, red light, which would mean stay where you are, or reverse, which means one step back.
Yeah.
And the problem is a lot of us who have histories of trauma, or humans in general, have habits of hypersocializing, which is trying to make another person feel comfortable based on our own actions. So this is the opposite of that. You're not doing this exercise to try to make the other person feel good. You're doing it to stay in connection with what feels good for you. And if you're worried about offending the person, that you didn't want them close to you, that's normal, but that's not the point. The point is to try on purpose to really center yourself. This is the practice. This is the difference between intimate, connected, honest, authentic, vulnerable sex or tender love and connection and betraying ourselves habitually.
Yeah.
And or being in inauthentic connections and relationships. So centering yourself, what feels good for me? Red light, green light, reverse. And to set a really clear container, what you do is it's just 3 minutes. It's a 3-minute timer with you in the driver's seat. And then it's a 1-minute timer in silence to silently digest what happened. And then you each set a 1-minute timer for sharing what your experience was like, and then another 1-minute timer for silent digestion. And then after that, you switch 3 minutes for the next person to be the driver, 1 minute silence, 1 minute shares, and then another minute silence. This is incredible foreplay.
Yeah.
Not just sexual foreplay, but like this is it's like not even a 15-minute game that builds so much intimacy. It's completely transformative. It's one of these experiences that when you have it, you're like, holy mother of God, like, I didn't know this was such a big deal.
Yeah.
So be prepared that it's actually a really big deal to do this little teeny easy practice. And then after that, so that's the first game.
Yeah.
So give yourself time, be gentle with yourself, let that be something that you take seriously and like that you give room to process around it. But I like having this really structured approach to it because it also makes it safer. Like it's not very long, it's short.
Yeah.
Still super powerful. And then the second piece is to notice when in your dynamic with someone do you start to hypersocialize? Do you start to decenter yourself? And like, can you identify what those moments are? Is it when you're deciding what you want to do for dinner? Is it, like when do you defer power and decision making to the other person? And if you're listening, I'd be like, oh my God, well, I always do that with everything. Like I never am the one who makes the decisions. So if that's the case, totally fine. Like I'm somebody who likes to defer a lot of decisions depending on the thing. Like I don't want to decide what we're doing for dinner. You fucking decide. But just noticing that tendency to defer your power, your decision-making power to another, specifically around intimacy. Is it when you're at dinner, you're starting to worry about, well, when we go home, are we going to have sex, et cetera, et cetera. And then insert, the key here is to insert a little hack, insert a little pause. So say, hey, pause. I notice I just want you to make all the decisions around this, and I'd like to just be the one to make the decision, even if it means I say I'm not ready to make the decision yet.
Yeah.
Like I'd like to be the decision maker on this time around. Maybe it's on sex, maybe it's on foreplay, maybe it's on whatever, but noticing where you normally defer the decision making and literally saying pause and saying like, I'd like to drive this car here with this. And you can even use the red light, green light reverse thing. So
yeah. That's amazing. I really love that game. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's I feel very special since it's not been published. I'm like, oh, I've got a little preview. That's amazing. If you have a tiny bit more time, another thing I would love to ask you about is how being an entrepreneur and running a small business and being on social media has kind of influenced the way you set boundaries and the way you do being in community on Instagram, for example. I saw you share something really beautiful about consent in sex and in marketing being related, and how actually we can look at these two very different things with similar approaches. Yeah, can you speak on that a little bit?
Totally. Well, sex and sales are all contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say yes to being sensual or sexual or even just emotionally intimate with someone, you're contracting your time with each other. And I don't mean that to be cut and dry, because it's obviously more magical than that.
Yeah.
But so is sales. Mm-hmm. So when you decide, I'm going to hire this person to do this thing, or I'm going to put my money into this, I'm going to give my money to this thing to receive this good or service, it's a contract. It's a sacred exchange of energy. I want this. I want to be tangled with this thing to some extent, or I want to let this thing come into my energetic field. So what is consent? Consent is both parties willingly agree and desire that kind of communion to happen. And so I think one of the things that a lot of sales does wrong is you're trying to manipulate, you're trying to exploit, you're trying to convince somebody that they need your stuff. And in sex, like, what feels worse than someone trying to manipulate you into needing them? So I think the holiness really happens in both places when you acknowledge that every contract we have is sacred. And we can either be treating our contracts with reverence and really being awake and aware around, what does it mean for me to say yes to this? What's the energy with which I want to say yes to this?
Yeah.
Am I willing to find the win-win here, or am I just trying to take something? Am I willing to find, is this other person or this other service provider willing and desiring to find a win-win, or are they just trying to take something? Do I want this, but am I really not ready for it? But just resent that I'm not ready for it.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that they completely overlap, right? Wanting what you can't have, trying to make yourself something you're not so that you can get what you can't have, and then violating yourself by either changing your personality or spending too much money. It's all the same. It's exactly the same in my book. So consent, again, I love how the word consensual has sensual in it.
Yeah.
And sensual isn't very enjoyable or pleasurable when we're beyond our capacity. Right? So pleasure, the etymology of the word pleasure, is what pleases you in a measured way. So if we're beyond our measured capacity, it's not pleasurable anymore. Consensual, with that sensuality, with that good feeling in our bodies and in our systems. And I think if we can start to think about that with sex and with sales, our world will look very different.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your offerings came to be? So I know you have a group program, you're offering one-on-one work, which is really beautiful. You're putting out a ton of free content. And have I heard you say you might also plan a podcast, or did I dream about that?
I do have a pod. I've already interviewed 6 or 7 people, but I'm putting the podcast on hold because I really need to do all systems go on the book.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yes. Cool.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more in more detail about what the different things are that you're offering and where people can find you. And yeah, tell us everything.
Okay. So yes, I have group programs, and the groups came out of actually, I did a book tour for Secret Bad Girl. I was talking to my best friend Jody on the phone, and she's like a muse for me somehow, or like a valve. Like when I talk to her, my ideas just come through, and she just holds this beautiful space. So I was trying to figure out the workshop, like how do I want to frame this? And because I was doing this tour that had book parties and workshops. And I was like, I think people need to grow from secret bad girls into grown somethings, because the secret bad girl is this child archetype. It's this younger self. What would the older archetype be? And it was this grown goddess. And I just want to speak to that word, right? Goddess, because it's been so appropriated at this point. We think goddess means oh, you have to be this sexy femme, blah, blah, blah. But no, let's study the actual goddesses. There are some fierce motherfucking goddesses who are employing the heavens, who are employing the elements, etc. So it's not this whitewashed, prissy thing. Anyway, Grown Goddess Academy is a circle of women and people who identify as women or left of female identifying. However, trans people are welcome, basically. And it's a space where we come together for 10 lessons on unshaming and reclaiming your pleasure, your power, your sensuality, your truest self. And there are 5 kind of key pieces to it. I am, which is that unshaming and reclaiming your core identity. I won't, which is reviving your truest boundaries. I will, which is devoting to the life that turns you on. I do, which is really embodying the practices that support those other things. And we are, which is collective liberation. And when we circle together, it's just so different than when we do the one-on-one work. Now, I'll talk about why the one-on-one work's amazing, but when we circle together, the act of circling alone destigmatizes so much of what we're carrying, because one of the key components of trauma is it isolates.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like you're totally alone and like nobody can know what you've been through. So to come together and to be with a group of other incredible human beings and see, like, gosh, they're worthy of love and belonging. Maybe I am too. Is really profound, really powerful. I have another group that's just beginning called Sex After Trauma. And that group, we do 10 lessons. Both of these, it's 10 lessons, 10 group calls, and a 3-day workshop at the end, which is amazing. But the Sex After Trauma piece, we really work on the pathway from trauma to turn on. So from numb to pain to unfelt emotions to pleasure. And then all of the relational pieces too. Boundary, consent, really being your authentic self in relationship. So that's also incredible, super fun. Yeah. And then the one-on-one work, I'm really a firm believer that with trauma, with anything, we need maps. So everything I do is really map making. I'm a cartographer, essentially. But with the one-on-one work, I make a personalized map for somebody. So they come, we have a very deep, thorough intake session, and I make a personalized map. What's their current way of being? What's their younger version that they're kind of living inside of? What are its gifts and what are its limitations?
Yeah.
And what do they really want to achieve or accomplish in their life that feels limited or stuck? And so we get really clear on that. And then what would a new way of being, the more grown version of them be that would be able to actually accomplish or embody what they're longing for with more ease and more efficiency? And then what are the specific personalized gaps, developmental gaps, that if they could practice those things and flex those muscles would help them grow from their current way into their new way? So that's a psychological framework that holds the container. And then inside of that, we do trauma resolution alchemical work. So we do the physiological, personal, deep embodiment work of completing incomplete emergencies, completing that fight, that flight, that freeze that's been stuck. So that's a bit of the work that I do, and I love it. It's I'm stuck.
Yeah. And you're writing your second book, right? When is that gonna come out?
So I was thinking it's going to come out early February, but then I was told that I need more time for actual publicity, which I might actually do so more people could get the book. So it's between February and May.
Yeah, that's very exciting. The spring is a great time. Cool. Yeah. So where can people find you? And in particular, I really want everyone to sign up for your video series. Where can they find that? RachelMaddox.com/Grown Goddess Video Series is the official URL for that. But also, if you just sign up on my homepage, you'll get redirected to that. Perfect. Great. Yes. Awesome. We put that in the show notes as well. Rachel, thank you so much. I really believe with so much love in your work, and I'm so glad we met, and I'm really, really grateful for this conversation as well. Thank you.
You're just the sweetest, yummiest, most delicious person ever. I'm so grateful to have been here with you. And
thank you.
Just excited for your whole journey.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.